So much is happening in the world of AI dev. Maybe in the last 4 or 5 months is the acceptance that knowledge and intelligence are not the same. All these models are becoming very intelligent, but what we also see is that to be a great and powerful developer is truly AI native and is 100x productive, a lot of it comes down to context.
A way that a developer wants to write code. An LLM can very often provide a correct answer back to a user, but if it's not the correct answer that a user wants to see in a way that they want to see it, it creates frustrations.
The fact that you need to review in the first place is a big limiting factor in how productive you can be. The more you can say up front and trust that it will be applied, the more you can delegate and the more successful you can do that. You want agents to use your software. You want them to use your tools. You want them to use them correctly. And context is oftentimes the means that you have it. I would predict that in 2026, we'll see much more substantial use of open models, especially in development and in recurring activities.
Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is for developers building with AI at the core. So whether that's exploring the latest tools, the workflows, or the best practices, this podcast's for you. A really quick ask, 90% of people who are listening to this haven't yet subscribed. So if this content has helped you build smarter, hit that subscribe button and maybe a like. All right, back to the episode.
Hello and welcome not just to another episode of the AI Native Dev, but also to 2026. Amazing.
Insane, sort of still hard a little bit to grok it.
I'm Simon Maple. I'm one of your hosts of the AI Native Dev.
And I'm Guy Podjarny. I am the co-host here and CEO and founder of Tessel.
Yeah, amazing. So this is one of the episodes that we do, I say every year. We're actually only 18 months old. So
every year it's already a tradition. We're officially making it a tradition
That's
now
it.
here by sort of making it the second time.
It's routine now. So we are going to do a look back on 2025 and a look forward to, let's predict some of the things that are going to happen that we are almost, we can easily predict AI changes and paths.
It's like sort of taking candy for a baby. It's so easy to sort of know what's going to come in.
And we'll prove it just by looking back at some of our 2025 predictions and showing how nailed on those predictions were. A lot happened in 2025.
A lot.
Do you want some stats about the podcast?
Yeah, would love it.
We had 53 podcast episodes, which is, we do one a week, so that's kind of expected, but it's nice to know that we're hitting that cadence.
Yeah, indeed. So some proof of the numbers of it.
It's
a lot of content. That's like many hours of kind of conversations, and each of those things has a whole bunch of work ahead of time, and then, of course, after for editing and posting.
Absolutely. And how many views do you think? So on the AI Native Dev YouTube, of course, we have the podcast. It's mostly podcasts. We have a few other videos, but how many views do you think we had? I know you know, so maybe let's see your acting skills here, Guy. How many views do you think we had on the AI Native Dev?
87 views. 87. Yeah, I think it's like all of your friends, right? Like
slightly lower, actually. we had over 1 million views across the year on the AI Native Dev YouTube alone.
Yeah,
which is amazing.
It's insane, and I think it's a testament to just sort of how engaging this domain is, right?
Yeah.
And what we try to do here is we try to, kind of capture and try to distill and debate, a bunch of just the action that is going on.
Yeah.
And so much is happening in the world of AI dev. It's very hard to kind of keep up, and. Hopefully we pay a little bit of a service of it, but I think just sort of the amount of interest, the amount of views, the amount of great feedback we get is kind of a good demonstration that, this is just it's a domain where we all need to kind of work together to try and just sort of maintain a grip on the changes.
And we'll try and push out as much great content as we absolutely can. We have just over 45,000 subscribers across all platforms. 190 shorts, and of course we release these episodes in a number of different ways. Some shorts, some cut down versions where I think they're about 10 minutes or so, and we get some of the best bits. Our most listened to episode. First of all, who do you think the host was, Guy? You or me?
Ooh, well, you're far more entertaining, so I would imagine that it's you.
But the people didn't go for that, Guy, weirdly. Your episode with Olivier Pimel, CEO of Datadog.
Yeah, all is amazing. He's got so many sort of deep insights on it. It's so sort of driven, right? Sort of running the sort of, what is it, like $40 billion? And that's the right number right now. Like insane company on it. Still so close to the metal and has such great insights.
Yeah, over 50,000 views on that post. Let's go into a few few of them. Let's look at some anecdotes and let's dig into some of our favorite episodes, favorite learnings, interesting thought process that we had. Way back when, I was looking at the very first episode we did in 2025. It was Macy Baker. Macy's here at Tesla, working across AI engineering and now the DevRel group. And she's a community engineer. It was all around prompt engineering. And that was something which was, I don't know, it felt like such a buzzword back in the day.
Yeah.
Now we don't talk about prompt
Official
engineering
jobs.
that much.
Yeah, official jobs that have been posted. First of all, I think it was a really fun episode on it. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it was like our first episode that was really kind of purely playful, right? Of just sort of enjoying a little bit the wonder that is LLMs, right? We did the sort of deception games, right? And you know, Macy's incredible, you know, so that's an advantage of there. But yeah, it does feel like, in general, like you look at 2025 and you look at the beginning of the year and you think about LLMs and prompts, and I mean, it really feels like at least a decade ago.
Yeah.
You know, in just sort of normal time, just sort of mental time of like, what were we thinking a year ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, leaning more into agents now, we lean more into context versus prompts with pure LLMs.
Yeah.
We had a couple of really interesting sessions that I had. One with Max in the AI engineering team, giving us a nice 101 with agents, but also with Yaniv. And Yaniv was doing a bunch of work looking at the interactions between an agent and an LLM.
Yeah.
More kind of like man in the middle, looking at the discussions that was going between. Very, very interesting breakdowns on the different tool usage that Claude versus OpenAI's agent, and also Gemini CLI, of course, and recognizing there are significant differences between the number of tools, the tool usage, and also the system prompts, the style of system prompts that each have. Super interesting session, essentially contrasting those different approaches.
Yeah, and I think that one is like a recent one, so it's easy to relate to the kind of the current interest level, right? But I think to an extent, when you look at both the sort of the Macy episode way back when and kind of the 101 on agents, it's interesting. There's basically a whole exercise of reverse engineering. How do these creatures behave, right? And it's weird. Like when you stop to think about sort of AI and development, like suddenly we need to kind of infer behavior, or like try to understand the behavior of the tools that we are using, which is new. I mean, I think we're getting used to it, but that thread actually continues all the way from understanding how would they behave in prompts and how would we sort of tell them things to how do they behave now in agents, mode, and how do they interact with tools. It's still about how do you guide these features.
It's so interesting because now we've essentially got two black boxes, right? You've got the black box of the LLM, which is how is it coming to this answer? How is it providing this response? And you've got this black box of the agent. How is it actually going to go about trying to get this response? What tools is it going to use? How is it going to use the context? What context should it pull in? Should it reach out for? When should it do web searches? When should it read the file system? You've got these two layers now, which it's quite hard to navigate.
And it's different degrees of freedom. And I think it's important to remember that it's actually always the model, right? Like even the agents have no intelligence in them, right? They are just facilitators of combinations. But I think, as Yaniv was pointing out in the episode, it's interesting to think about how often are the models tuned to the agents versus how much are they just sort of generic models that the agent is now just an interface to them, right? As sort of Boris says with his building of Claude Code. But I think in all of those cases, it's just the degrees of freedom. Like as we try to make more, to do more with these agents and with AI, right? With sort of these LLMs, we sort of just encounter more of these degrees of freedom, more of this variability, and figuring out how to kind of wrangle that is hard. So before we were trying to find the magic incantations, now we have more tools in our disposal, like the literal tools of like the tools that we give the agents, but also just sort of means of managing, context. That's why it kind of went from prompt to context. Like prompt is one form of context, there's so much more.
Yeah. And we'll jump into agents a little bit more. But let's look at some of the, I guess, some of the news that happened in and around the topics that
Yeah.
we were talking about over the
the
podcast.
time. So
Yeah.
I think what I loved is like a lot of the conversations so that we've had over the year have to do with sort of product scope, right? Like
Yeah.
we're in AI dev. Part of it is like these sort of models and their brilliance and their sort of not so brilliance. How do we sort of deal with that? But then a lot of it is like, what does a dev stack look like? What are the tools? And I feel like there were a bunch of things that we kind of foreshadowed a little bit. Like we had good conversations with some thought leaders. This again, we're sort of here to sort of bring the smart folks over, and they, a lot of the conversations and their views have kind of ended up panning out, right? One that really stuck with me is the conversation we had late in the year with Meryl from Graphite, and they, of course, towards the end of the year got acquired by Cursor, and a lot of my conversation with Graphite was with Meryl was on like if the review agent can automatically identify issues, why wouldn't the agent earlier on just sort of find those problems? And if you can sort of modify and fix problems at the review agent right there without going back, isn't that an agent now? And should these two products really be distinct products on it? Meryl had good responses at the time on it. Couldn't sort of say, well, you know what, Cursor is about to parse. And I don't know if he did or didn't know at the time. But it was interesting to see how that conversation, clearly kind of panned out, and Cursor now acquired Graphite.
Well, I'm sure the folks at AnySphere listen to the podcast.
I probably gave them the idea.
Yeah,
So like, what Guy's saying it makes sense.
Why aren't we doing that? Yeah.
It's like, let's go. But congrats to Merit on it. We also had you had a great conversation with the Slack AI lead.
Yes, absolutely. With Samuel Messing, and it's super interesting because we were talking a little bit about how agents are being used these days, and of course, with the terminal approach of developers interacting with coding agents, it's very interesting that actually chat is becoming a far more interesting means of communication. We're not doing this as much if you look at the terminal UIs in IDEs. Of course, there are alternatives like Cursors and people like that, but when we start almost anchoring ourselves in this more chat-based system, we have better chat environments than a terminal. Why not Slack? And so we discussed the opportunity or the value in, rather than engaging with an AI coding agent in a terminal, why not do it in a place that already has the best environment for discussion, collaborative discussion as well, with channels, etc. to happen?
Absolutely.
Why not Slack? And we talked about a little bit about Devin and how this is really where Devin started. And of course, they added their integrations into Slack. Of course, Claude Code now has a Slack integration that was released a few months after we talked about it again. So what's happening?
I think you can officially say that this podcast is a mover and shaker.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's the only reasonable explanation for why all of these like moves happen so shortly after we discussed them.
I mean, the alternative is we're just stating the obvious, Guy, and I don't want to even entertain that.
No, now you're just stating the obvious. But, I do think it's really interesting. Steve Yege has a mental model to talk about maturity of development or kind of an evolution, and it was interesting to think about that Slack conversation in that context. Right, you go from kind of a focus on the code. And you need to be in an environment like the IDE in which you are editing the code, to kind of increasing decoration. Like you go from, I liked his view of like the chat window is small, and then it gets bigger. So your chat pane in your IDE becomes the primary dominant. You just sort of look at the code, and then you go to terminal. And it's interesting to think about sort of Slack as a continuation of that. So it's interesting because that really flips when you think about product scoping on it. That further sort of flips it around. And so some IDEs you see anti-gravity coming along and such might be kind of introducing more chat and like leaning into I'll create a new interface, and others are indeed you had a chat interface. So I thought that was really, really interesting, and again, like a little bit of foresight here. And then I guess, where we did state the obvious a little bit maybe was with Base 44. And so we had more on the show on it. He already built something amazing, kind of built a vibe coding platform, sort of lovable, bold style on it. And I think in about 6 months, it got acquired for some sort of silly amount by Weeks, and he came on. We had sort of great conversations on it. I wanted to test out. He was saying that he thinks in 6 months you'd be able to build Base 44 with Base 44. I didn't have time to sort of test that out. I feel like it doesn't sound as far-fetched at the moment. But what we did see is in Wix's Q3 earnings, we see that definitely hasn't slowed down the growth of it, right? And just sort of quoting some numbers here, they now have 2 million users served per that announcement, which is about 7 times increase from the acquisition, I think 5 or 4 months prior. And they talked about over 1,000 paying subscribers added every day, and they do have numbers they're not quite the sort of, I don't know how to sort of say, like, they are ridiculous numbers. They're not quite as ridiculous as numbers you see from Lovable, right?
Yeah.
Going to 200 million ARR, but still, that was while it was a quick acquisition and an expensive one for weeks, like, clearly, it is panning out in dividends. Congrats to more. And
Absolutely. And when you think Base 44 was, I think there were like six people.
No, just him. That was the whole notion with sort of Base 44 is basically him. I think about a month before the acquisition, they hired one person,
Right, okay.
fully bootstrapped, and he just sort of built that with it. And I think with today's agents, they're also getting better and better, and you might start imagining that being plausible.
Yeah.
But we had another episode of my conversation with Tom Hume around kind of debunking the myth of the sort of $1 billion sort of single person organization. That's probably the closest that they got to that. I stand behind what in my conversation with Tom said, which is I think you'd be able to have one person produce value that a few years ago would have been worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
But because one person can do that, many individuals can do that now.
Yeah. There's a new baseline, I guess.
And I think we'll kind of get to this a little bit in the predictions on it, but I think one of the questions is today there's a lot of value arbitrage by the people that are sort of the fast movers, right? And they come along and they create a lovable system, and now they're building on the brand and those capabilities. The capabilities themselves that they are building no longer feel quite as differentiated, right? You can build a Base 44 with Base 44. It means it's easy to create Base 44.
Yeah.
And so it's really a lot more about that sort of, time to market, and then can you now conquer it with some form of network effect and brand and, just sort of sheer scale economies.
Yeah.
Can you build those out? But it's interesting to sort of see how these kind of built up and how the fast movers, we don't hear about the ones that failed, but the fast movers that succeed manage to sort of rip so much value very quickly. But I still don't think that they're going to be, like a single person $1 billion company, because others will just mimic that.
Yeah. Yeah. For our guests as well, it's been very exciting. Lots of you've created a list here of
it's not just it's not just a foresight that we had on it. It's also it's good luck. You should come on the podcast because good things will happen to you. I just sort of created a quick list of it. We had Quinn Slack, the SourceGraph CEO, come along. We had a lot of great conversations on it. They've of course launched AMP as a dev agent, which in a world in which it's very hard to stand out on it, they really managed to sort of innovate and build a bunch of things that are unique, and they've since split off the company, and Quinn is now the CEO of AMP and has another team member running SourceGraph itself, so definitely leaned into it. Matti from 11 Labs was here. There was a really fun conversation. Love Matti, love what they're building. Interesting, so they've raised twice since that round. I think the last one was sort of $6 billion or maybe a little bit over. Funny thing is, in the conversation, and actually in many conversations I've had with Matti, they had this sort of clarity around they're an audio AI company. In their last announcements, they now do some video and all that. Again, product scoping, it's all blending. Also, a bit of a fan anecdote. We talked a lot about their no titles message that at the time felt controversial. We've since embraced that here at Tessel as well. We're having kind of no titles.
Yeah, now we're just Guy and the Minions.
We don't say that officially.
Oh, sorry.
We don't say that officially.
Oh yeah, that was the private doc. That was the DM that you sent me. That's right. There's
no value to confidentiality there. But no, we had other great ones. We had Victor from Synthesia. They've been rumored to raise around at $4 billion. We had Matteo from Lakera building AI security solution. They got acquired by Checkpoint. Of course, Meryl from Graphite that we mentioned. So yeah, all in all, I think if you're a startup founder, you're building something exciting on it, you manage to get on the podcast on it, your odds of being acquired or sort of raising on the round are clearly statistically significant.
Yeah, we should add that as a tagline. Yeah, absolutely.
Charge a fee of it. You can come in. We're going to get 2% carry.
Well, I mean, it's testament to like some of the amazing guests that we've had on the
and that's been very humbling. And I think we don't clearly a lot of this is sort of the back channel of it, but I think first of all, we're very thankful to all of you listeners, right? You sort of come along, you ask You ask us for sort of topics on it, and we try to debate those, and we love the interactions post. But also as our audience grows, we've had a lot of really great inbounds and sort of very smart and capable people wanting to come on, wanting to share their views, and that of course creates a bit of a flywheel for the podcast itself. So basically, the more you listen, the more you advocate and sort of spread the podcast, the better the guests that we can bring you and kind of have them sort of share their views.
Absolutely, and we're always open to suggestions as well. So do please, if there's someone you feel would be, you'd love for us to chat to and interview and talk through their thoughts, let us know. Podcast at tesla.io, and we'll work through that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we observed in the market, or I guess on the AI coding.
Did something happen in the market in 2025? Bit of a snoozy year.
There were a couple of minor things. I saw one thing on the register that happened that we should maybe talk about. But no, I think the big thing the big shaker, and I guess we noticed this at Tesla, obviously, when we were adjusting to market changes, was agents.
Yeah.
And how much agents really grabbed hold of the interest of every company that is thinking about AI, using AI, building with AI, and obviously it also made a change in the way we at Tesla think about our products, think about our positioning in the market.
100%.
So in terms of the market, let's start with the market.
Yeah, I think agents are clearly the biggest, amidst the many things that happened this year. This was, I guess, as predicted a little bit at the beginning of the year of the agent. And specifically in the world of development, I think the advent of Claude Code and sort of Sonnet 3.7 and
they were
the
much
strength.
released at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think Claude Code was around for a bit before, but it really kind of started shining, when Sonnet 3.7 came out, and its kind of capabilities around coding. And so I'd say in that sort of April-May timeframe, there was a bit, sort of really a corner kind of turned and significant progress made in just how usable development agents are. I mean, they existed before. Agentic frameworks existed, Devin existed. There were a variety of agents, but I think it just made it practical, and you can really see the turning point in terms of adoption, in terms of usage, and in terms of the ability of the likes of us, at Tesla and many companies to now bet on agents.
Yeah.
And so there is a very clear delineation of the before and after. There was a lot of progress leading up to that sort of April-ish timeframe. But I think from a development perspective, the world has basically become agentic roughly in that sort of April-May timeframe.
And of course, 3.7 was probably one of the first more public, more well-known reasoning models, or models that provided a reasoning capability.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that played a part in the success of agents, or do you think that would have just kind of,
I think it's a combination of many things. I mean, I think, OpenAI clearly sort of introduced reasoning, right, with their sort of O1 model of it. I think Sonnet 3.7 was the first one that had the broader, like the gradual sort of thinking, how much is your thinking budget? I think it played a role, but more than that is I think Anthropic just managed to build a model that was better on the coding front, and then to build this interface with Claude Code to really interact with it. And so, one element was just the sheer success of it, and they've been using Claude Code internally before, and so they knew that it was successful. And Boris, the creator of Claude Code, talks a lot about how for him it was just almost by accident that it started writing code. It was just about creating an interface to the model. But a lot of the a lot of the details of those evolved over time. But creating that interface in which you are not focusing on the code, you are in terminal, and so the code is secondary, and then having the agentic search, I think that level up, being able to use the local tools in the terminal and be able to search. I think both of those, alongside that sort of core model, have combined for something great. I don't know. I think it's hard to really pinpoint one thing, but what I think you can say very clearly is that the interface of Claude Code has kind of tapped into a bunch of those strengths in a very kind of powerful way that just made it more likely to succeed, made it sort of feel the magic.
And the UX, I guess, as the years gone on, the more and more that their team has added to those types of things, whether it's hooks, whether it's Claude Skills is a great example, whether it's the integrations, like very interesting browser integrations that were kind of released at the end of last year as well.
Yeah, and around that, I think the two other sort of interesting phenomena that you can say about agents this year is the adoption of MCP and agent skills as standards. I think what's interesting, so MCP technically launched the year before, you mentioned 2024, but it was really very widely adopted, including by Anthropic competitors throughout 2025 and fairly early in 2025. And that was interesting. It was sort of a bit of a non-obvious move, by the ecosystem to embrace the protocol. The protocol remains like amazing and horrible at the same time. It's a very immature protocol in various ways, but it's also a really great boost to create standardized way of connecting any software, any capabilities into the world. And then as that evolved and people abused MCPs and there was sort of not enough, and our knowledge of agent grew, and Claude or Anthropic launched Claude Skills, and then created an open standard version of that as agent skills. And it looks like sort of Jira is still a bit out, but it looks like agent skills are, they're definitely initially supported by many other competitive agents. And so that's interesting. First of all, like kudos to Anthropic for releasing things that are useful enough that really even the competitors understand that it is useful to kind of boost the ecosystem with them. And so that's been great, and seeing them do it again and again.
I'm wanting to see the advancements through the standards as well, which is wonderful, because not everyone does that. Yeah. Most would probably go, well, actually, let's create my proprietary Claude Skills and leave it there. Let's not worry about what others are doing. But this is a big useful step for the market, not just.
I agree, and I think it's interesting to sort of see them be the trendsetter. And in general, as you track agents over time, I think what you could see is, in most cases, Claude Code was the leader in kind of setting the trend of how products would work. Like hooks became, were initially introduced into Claude Code, and then they became prevalent elsewhere. Commands, I think, are initially Claude Code and became fairly prevalent. I do want to give a shout out to the Cursor team, though, because Cursor rules have existed for a very long time. And in many ways, skills are very much like
That's very
rules.
true, yeah.
They're a bit more kind of native to the model, so they're like a little bit, they're different in a variety of ways. But I do think that the idea of sort of structured instructions or sort of reusable context is very much there. So it's been great to sort of see the leadership, see the collaboration, and of course kind of culminated late in the year by the creating of a Linux Foundation, sort of sub-foundation dedicated to AI open infrastructure. I'm very curious to see how a Linux foundation, or generally a kind of an open source foundation, can deal with the pace of change on it. It's there's a lot that I love about foundations and open source. Pace has not historically been the sort of the strongest suit, but I love the kind of contribution of, I think, skills have been donated. Agents MD has been donated over there. The Goose agent is there, so it'll be interesting to sort of see. I hope to see a lot of great things in 2026 around the open agent ecosystem.
Yeah.
We already had open weight models. I think we increasingly have substantial open source software, and how do those interact with the commercial players who are raising ridiculous amounts at ridiculous valuations, and so they do need to build a strong business around them.
Collectively competitors to Claude Code. We should also say, Codex making big strides as well. Gemini CLI, I hear a ton of people saying how much the competitors have got closer and have improved, and people really, many preferring those different agents as well. So going to be an interesting year, and we can maybe talk predictions in a bit.
Yeah.
But interesting year to see how agents compete for market share.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen like a lot of progress over there. And I do want to point out that also some independent agents kind of came along. Right? You have Kilocode, you had Goose, you had OpenHands, I think, has sort of dropped a bit off the sort of the charts, or maybe it's just blended with those others. But you see a lot of open agents come along. Kilocode is the one that really caught my attention, just because sort of built very much to be a kind of cross-model agent, and it's a newer one, so it feels very modern on it.
Yeah.
And I think in many of these different tools, each of them learn from one another. And so while Claude set the stage, they're not the only one that innovated. I think Codex, one thing, for instance, you can demonstrate is that they launched initially in the cloud and then went to the CLI. And of course, Claude now has Claude Cloud versions of it. So people explore different domains and different paths. I do think that it's sort of a non-controversial statement to say that Anthropic has focused a lot more on sort of the enterprise and are probably the dominant player when it comes to development. But in the latest iterations, and we'll talk about that in predictions, the sheer capability of the models in development, you definitely had, there's a lot to sort of say for the Gemini models and where is it that they do better. And definitely the gap on OpenAI and other fronts is smaller.
Yeah. More and more as the year went on, when models and things like that got dropped, do you feel like that made as big a splash as it did a year ago when a model improvement caused such a big difference? With agents now, do we care more about other things that improve the experience, whether that's tools, whether that's the awareness of the project, the context and things like that? Do we care more about that versus the intelligence of the underlying model?
It's a good question. I mean, I think, again, 1 year feels like a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so if you harken back, earlier in the year, there was a lot of conversation about the rumored failed training runs of, at the time, I think it was Llama 4 and whatever the sort of the next big models of the versions. And the growing kind of perspective in the world of sort of AI research has become that the value is no longer in pre-training, it is in post-training. It's in a lot of the refinements that come after, and then later on, of course, in agentic. I do think that Google kind of rocked that boat a little bit with their latest models, right? I think it was in November that they released a whole slew of models that were substantially better, and OpenAI announced the sort of code red, right, about the reach of them. You also see a lot of the dynamics of existing distribution play out. You see Meta AI with their reach, you see Google with their reach, you see Grok and Twitter with their reach. And so I think the world of research has kind of moved into more post-training and refinement than the pre-training, but maybe that is a bit challenged by the Google releases. And if you listen to Ilya Sutskever in the latest episode he had with Dwarkesh, he talks about this is going to be the year of research, and coming back to sort of thinking about different. So I'd say this year probably true that model improvements maybe in the second half of the year were not as dominant. I think OpenAI had a bad year in that sense. It had a lot of incremental improvements, but they didn't have a big splash moment of this model. Maybe Sora is the example, like the counter example. But in the dev world, I think Anthropic and Google kind of got more of the headlines, while OpenAI kind of kept up, but they sort of didn't lead those charts as much. But I wouldn't rule it out in the long term. Like I think there's still that's one thing that is hard for me to predict.
Yeah,
because research is very like hit and miss.
Of course, on the flip side, context and those types of things have made a massive improvement in terms of the way we use agents.
And I think that to me is a very, very big takeaway. It's close to heart kind of here at Tessel, but I think what has very much happened post-agents, maybe in the last sort of 4 or 5 months, is the acceptance that knowledge and intelligence are not the same. And so all these models are becoming very intelligent. The agents make them, they capitalize on that to give them arms and legs, right? To allow them to go off and invoke tools and gather more information and gather knowledge. But what we also see is that to be a great and powerful developer, that is using, that's truly AI native and, is whatever, 100x productive, a lot of it comes down to context. A lot of it comes down to you wrote the right instructions, the right summaries, you kept the docs in a certain place, you can pull down the right information at the right time and do context management so you don't sort of overflow the agent when you give it information. You name things correctly so the agent can find them where relevant. So you see this in the practices, you see it in the platforms themselves, and so Gemini has their sort of CLI extensions, but more notably, Claude launched Skills, GitHub has Copilot Spaces, of course, Cursor has always had rules, and they launched team rules on it. So a lot of investments in the platform in really reusable context, right? It says maybe the agent is very intelligent, and it is becoming more and more intelligent, but when you want it to use a certain library, you don't want it to need to analyze the code of the library. It's better if it has docs that teach it. If you want it to code the way you want to develop in a certain organization, it needs to know what the best practices are. It shouldn't just need to kind of infer them dynamically from historical code. And so this idea that if you harken back to my conversation with Guy Podjarny from Augment, a lot of their core competency was around learning from the code base. And I think their initial premise, I hope I'm not sort of misrepresenting his view here, was that they will train on the code base and they will kind of understand the code base. For them, they built it into these RAG, like you'll kind of real-time augment it, but it was all within that intelligence, like it will be fetched dynamically and intelligently and magically, by the system. You had Poolside last year; they were more training on the code base, and I think today there's more acceptance that it'll be more like a support knowledge base. It's more learn from these systems, extract out of them your instructions, and then keep those, and then monitor and manage those. And I think that is very aligned with kind of our view of the world at Hessel. We talk about sort of spec-centric software, which is increasingly what you want is to capture intent, capture knowledge, and then provide that in a smart way, which is not easy, to the agent, and then have the agent build on it. So that was to me a positive and maturing sort of step forward in getting agents and LLMs to help us build software.
Yeah, and I think from a usage point of view, a lot of frustrations from a developer using agents will very much occur whether it's anything as simple as a style, a way that a developer wants to write code, all the way through to whether it's organizational policies or, like you say, the way this code has been written in my code base today. An LLM can very often provide a correct answer back to a user, but if it's not the correct answer that a user wants to see in a way that they want to see it, it creates frustrations. And actually, the value of that agent becomes far less, because yes, it provides me the right response, but now I have to go in and update it and make changes to the answer to make it to allow me to actually be able to check it in as is. And that frustration, I think, with the context, with that ability to look as to not just how something could be done, but how something should be done, really unlocks the way in which a developer can actually reduce that frustration and get what they actually want to see, and reduce that time.
I agree with that, and I'll further emphasize that the fact that you need to review in the first place is a big limiting factor in how productive you can be. So the more you can say up front and trust that it will be applied, the more you can delegate, and the more successful you can do that. And I think what we see, so we see this context manifest in many ways through the system, and maybe it's worth kind of relating it to Tessel. And so Tessel, just as a quick journey, right, we sort of said, hey, spec-centric software will be the future, and over time, the importance of the code will diminish. That's what we've been saying all along, in favor of kind of captured intent. And I think that's happening. I think the world is moving towards that destination. I think what we see is there are maybe like two versions of that manifested. One is the advent of spec-driven development. And so that's more about when the agent approaches a task, not have it, like before it writes the code, stop and create a plan. And so that has now, fairly quickly as these things happen in this world, has just sort of become a core part of the way the agents build. You see Claude oftentimes defaulting to plan mode, and starting by creating a plan. You see anti-gravity, which is sort of the windsurf kind of rebranding, or like created on the backs, shall we say, of sort of windsurf post the Google acquisition. You see that creating plans and implementation plan ahead of time, and then you see external frameworks like SpecKit from from GitHub, and you see, of course, Kiro, and that we've had here. So you see all of those creating spec-driven development. That's more about the mode of interaction with the agent being, hey, let's form a plan together.
Yeah.
Take everything you understand. Here's what I want. Take everything you understood about what I told you and what I want to achieve. Take everything you understand about my current reality, and then put together a plan and let us review it, and then execute to the plan and draw within the lines, right? Like stay roughly there. And so I think that has gone from, are you kidding me? This is overhead. I don't want to slow down, to, yeah, of course, this is the way that you build in the span of 3 months,
Yeah.
something like that. And we've very much sort of felt that with the Tessel framework that we released, which, a lot of its goal was to say, hey, agent, hold off, wait, write the spec, create them, and only then kind of go off and update.
And to remind people, the Tessel framework that you're referring to there, this is not the spec registry that we're very, very much focused on today. This is more the spec-centric way of building software. So this is writing the spec that you then generate that code from using.
Right. Exactly. And that ended up being kind of the SDD. And so we had a lot of learning on that. And I think in many ways this has precisely happened, but it turned out that it really needs to be sort of embedded into the agent. And then the second version of context that came along is more the sort of the long-lived specs that talk about how you want to build, what is my environment, like what is the sort of the correct way for the agent to sort of produce software, what does good software look like in my environment, including sometimes product functionality of like, how do things work, whether it's how to use them or to be able to leave a trail behind you, right, of what is the functionality that is left. And so all of those are now fall not under SDD, but rather under context engineering or sort of context management.
Which is a massive term that's been repeated again and again and again by the whole market, the importance of context management and context engineering.
Absolutely. And over there, so context management has its own kind of layer of it. For Tessel right now, that's a lot of our focus on to say, well, how do you create the right context in the first place? Yes. So, how do you not require the agent to either have all the info kind of internalized in its brain ahead of time, which is clearly not relevant when things are dynamic, but also not needs to go and like read up massive code bases and get them correctly and not make mistakes and, read documents about practice. Like you have to create those documents, be intentional about what it is that you want. We have a lot of data. We've discussed some of that with these evaluations, for instance, in the episode with Yaniv, talking about how to evaluate those. So how do you create evaluation scenarios? And we should probably go back a little bit to the benchmarking. But how do you evaluate? Like you say words on it, and like I tell you words all the time, and you never listen. So like sometimes. So agents are sometimes the same. So how do we kind of evaluate, and how do you know whether the agents work? How do you know if the new fancy expensive model will be worth your dollars versus how do you know if like this sort of cheaper open model or optimized model, maybe that does the job and it's a lot cheaper, a lot faster. So how do you generate that context? How do you evaluate it to know it? How do you distribute it? Like there's so much to say.
Yeah.
How do you get to the agents? And of course, how do you get them to load the right context at the right time? And then how do you kind of observe things over time? So all of that world of context engineering that we've grown to think of as not just context engineering, but rather agent enablement. Like how do you kind of enable the agent with the right information at the right time? And then how do you kind of own this knowledge, this layer of intent, this layer of knowledge, of context? How do you manage that over time, keep it up to date, change it as models change? And so I think this is a brave new world of context that is very, very aligned with our kind of original vision at Tessel of it will become spec-centric. Swap the word spec for spec and knowledge and context, and these are all like synonyms really. And how do you develop in that world?
And very interesting that the way we used to talk about prompts, I say a year ago, like we're talking a decade ago, but
yeah.
It feels like that. When we talk about prompts, where we talk about using the correct language, and people thinking about prompt engineers, where you need to craft a prompt in a specific way, and then not just holding that to one developer, or first of all understanding what is the right thing, the evaluations are super important for that when we think more on the context side. But then secondly, that distribution, that when a developer gets that prompt correct, there was the thought of, okay, can we, and I know some tools did this as well, can we share these prompts across so that if I wanted to create a bunch of test cases, or if I wanted to do some code reviews, I'm using the correct prompt to guide the LLM in the right way. Now in context, we're hearing all those echoes in the same way. Okay, I create context. How do I know that context is well formed, is correctly written so that an agent can best consume it? Evals, the ability to actually eval load that context to say, yes, this is good context. No, this context isn't written well. You need to structure it in a different way to get the most out of it from an agent. And then of course that distribution, that when we get that context right, okay, if it's a policy thing, well, it's not just me that has to adhere to that policy. In an organized, particularly an enterprise, organization, and enterprises in particular, they have huge numbers of developers, huge teams that needs to be distributed to.
Right.
You can't just have one developer or a small subset of developers contributing some code which is either against policy or against the way in which the rest of the organization wants to build. So all of these challenges just magnify as soon as we think about it in the larger organization and the team development.
And I think a lot of it, so first of all, like I love the analogy to the LLMs, and we sort of felt it over here, right? Like we built a whole, might I say, sort of impressive evaluation system for prompts, and a lot of that needed to be sort of thrown by the wayside, in favor of an evaluation system that is agent-based, because that's the right way to interact. A lot of this sort of reverse engineering of like, how does it work, how do you affect it? I think what has changed is the scope of the task, and in the prompts you expected a level, of accomplishment. In the reasoning, maybe a little bit more, and then of course, you get to the agents of today. So I think we definitely need to build that. But I think a lot of the analogy here is that as the task grows, it becomes like a larger organization. And when you have a lot of people, they can all be, you hired amazing people, they're very intelligent. But in addition to kind of like as the scope of the task grows, it becomes a lot more like managing organizations, right? And, you have a whole pile of people, right? You have a group of intelligent people, right? Building out, and they still needs to be aligned. Like it's still hard to say, okay, we sat down and we discussed the thing and we agreed that we will do it. Do we remember? Do we know to go and read the right document at the right time, to perform an action? Do we remember like our own sort of selves from like a year ago, like the decision that we made, so we can kind of keep to it? And so a lot of these analogies apply now to agents of like, what do you want to tell them? A bit of a garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you gave them the wrong instructions, if you gave them irrelevant context, that takes away tokens, right? That takes away attention. And so how do you sort of shrink it? How can you be an efficient communicator? So a lot of those human analogies now occur. And some organizational philosophy comes into how do you make agents effective? Yeah.
So from the TESL point of view, then obviously, context is a big part of what we're building today and the platform that we're building. One of the terms that I know I've heard every single day pretty much is agent enablement. And this is super important, super powerful. Talk us through, first of all, what is agent enablement and what's TESL's role in that?
Yeah, I feel we should start discussing in sort of outcome-based tools versus sort of the technical element. So context is a very important tool or sort of means, context management of it. I think the eventual goal that you want is to enable the agents. And I find sales enablement actually to be an easier example, even though in development, clearly, like you think about sort of onboarding. So for developers, you can think about you need to onboard a developer. So you have a brilliant developer come along, join the team. You still don't expect them to kind of know how to build well within your organization the very first moment they landed. You need them to be onboarded. So what are the materials they need to read? And then over time, there's some element of continuous training. I think in development, it's a little bit harder to think about systemizing it because we rely a lot of individual kind of skills and individual talents. And, for good or bad, we sort of rely on this institutional knowledge. Sales enablement is an interesting analogy because oftentimes as organizations grow, you want your sales organization to be creative only to a degree. You want them to repeat the playbook. And so sales is a much more structured place in which you say, okay, here are the enablement materials. Hey, and in you salesperson, you need to read this, but also every existing salesperson every year at kickoff kickoff, we're going to teach you this is the sales process, these are the stages, these are the decks that you need to do, these are the materials, the emphasis, the messaging, like all the things that you need to provide. And then those get measured, and they get monitored, and we identify the cases where some random behavior was successful or when something falls through, and then you redefine a bunch of those practices, and then you train them again, to build those. And so agents are, I think that's maybe a slightly closer technical analogy to what we do with the agent enablement. So your eventual goal is to say, hey, I want agents to work in my organizations and specifically in my development and in my code base. I want them to build well for me. So how do I make them successful? What is the knowledge I need to equip them with? How do I kind of evaluate, role play and test and sort of see that works, which is something we can't do as well with people. We can be a lot more demanding with agents. How do I distribute that knowledge? How do I then observe behavior and sort of see when did it actually happen? And then how do you take that and optimize it? And when we apply it to agents, we see all these super interesting things that we'll continue to share over the next kind of couple of months. Is all these like really interesting observations. Like when we look at agent logs and what do they create, you can see how some instructions you put in your context they just ignore. They just don't do. And you see how other instructions, they will do it when we do the A/B test, when we evaluate with and without those instructions, they do the same thing anyway. So if you try to get it to use Git, it would use Git anyway. But if you try to get it to use a GH, instead as the CLI, you really need to say it in a very specific way to kind of counter the intuitive way. And so if you said Git, you wasted context. If you said GH in the wrong way, you're not going to get your result. So a lot of those, and eventually you have to think about how do I solve it? I've observed a problem, and that comes back to you modify the context. That's your tool. So we think a lot about if you are an organization, you want agents to work for you, you need to enable those agents, and context and the management of that context, the optimization of that context is the means through which you do it. Yeah. And then I want to say maybe one thing, like the other term that I harp on a little bit recently is agent experience. And I think from an organizational perspective, what you're doing is your agent enablement, in your organization. It's sort of maybe a better term. But when say you're an open source maintainer, right, and you have your library, you want agents to be able to successfully use it. Right? You built some library or some framework on it. You want developers to use it, and so you invest in developer experience. You care about your command line hygiene. You care about sort of ease of installation. You care about sort of self-healing when there's a problem. You care about all these traits, right? Composability, all these great developer experience traits. Like, why do you care? It's because you want people to use the stuff you've built, right? They're amazing. You want them to be accessible. You want them to be used correctly, so they don't come bother you with sort of silly mistakes. So with agents, you have the same need. You want agents to use your software. You want them to use your tools. You want them to use them correctly. And context is oftentimes the means that you have it. It is both your sort of UX and your docs, at the same time. And so the kind of the other lens of enabling agent is a bit more sort of focused on, for my piece of software, for my API, whether I'm an organization or sort of an open source maintainer or whatever it is, for my open source library or a closed source library, I want to provide a great agent experience, which is basically a form of I want to enable agents to be able to consume my work. And so all of that combines in my, granted, like I'm sort of deep in this sort of a Kool-Aid view into this sort of new reality of software development that is spec-centric or like intent-centric, right? Versus code-centric, in which what you're capturing, what you are communicating is how to do things. It's what to do, and it's not the sort of the implementation in the code.
It's going to be a big year for context. It's going to be a big year for enablement, and a big year for Tesla. That kicks off our predictions section.
Yeah, indeed. Tesla will be super fun to build, and super fun to use, and hopefully a massive success.
Amazing, amazing.
Right.
Okay, so to wrap up this episode, we're going to finish with not just the predictions of 2026, but let's see how favorable or how well our predictions of 2020, how poorly they aged in 2025. So we'll look at, we had kind of three categories, and we'll jump through these quickly. The first category was actually my prediction, which is we'll look beyond day one development in 2025, whereby in 2024 we were very, very much, focused on code generation and building digital, like throwing out, spitting out code left, right, and center. I predicted, okay, we're going to actually think much, much more about the path beyond day zero, beyond day one, and so forth. Can we look more into the testing? Can we look more into the maintenance and stuff like that? Did that happen?
Not so much.
Not so much.
Not so much. Well, I think like two things happen, right? Like I think I'd sort of give you like partial marks on that, because I feel most of what grew was more about what we can do with the agent. So like, can I do initial things bigger? I do think that there's this advent of an AI native developer that works in these sort of, context-rich way and focuses on delegation and doesn't work. And for them, they do think a bit about the longevity because they would store artifacts. So I think they get some of those points, but I think it hasn't reached teams. Like, I think it's still in like single player, and it hasn't reached quality per se. It's like purely functionality.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there's a lot of work that's done in the, I guess, the reviewing of code that's being generated, but it's still very much day zero. It's still in the pull request of the piece of code that's being delivered, rather than the kind of like day one. This already exists. How do we maintain?
100%. Yeah.
The second category was, I guess, we were looking at models back then. So we were looking at model leaders. Would there be a sole model leader, or would it still be a group of people kind of like jumping past each other for a brief period?
Yeah, I think I said at the time that I don't think there's going to be a leader. And we talked a lot about fragmentation. It's like, hey, would organization kind of pick a model at the time, and sort of stick to it? Would they, would one of them sort of break out? And it's like, there's no way they're going to come and kind of pass one another. There will be more of that continuation that we've sort of seen in 2024. Yeah. And I think that happened.
Yeah, I'd say it has. I think people are maybe picking between models, which is another thing that we kind of like predicted in terms of what's their need. Do they need more of a reasoning model for this type of task or whatever? And say, but yeah, in terms of the vendors, yeah, people are jumping between, and people are, depending on which month you're at, you'll see a different vendor at the top, and I think they're keeping up with each other, which is a good thing. It's a great thing for the.
I think a lot of the sort of the kind of the beating one another is happening of it. And I mean, I just sort of give a few concrete examples of it. Gemini clearly, when it came out with its sort of latest models in I think November, that definitely Showcase suddenly is at the top of all the different benchmarks on it. I think the other interesting play was Cursor launching its own models in Composer, which are sort of faster. I think generally perceived as not maybe quite sort of as good at some things, but for specifically others, they might be very good and fast, and maybe faster than the others. So I think that played out, so I think there's been a lot of there's still been like edging one another. And I think also the gaps have shrunk. There has been a lot of there's like almost like a taste element. People start developing. Like I kind of like this model. I like their style.
Befriending
the model. But I think loyalty remains low, and most organizations remain kind of multi-tool, multi-model. And generally, when you talk to them, we talk to a lot of enterprises, they don't see that changing.
Yeah, I agree. The third, part obvious, part a gem in this one. When we're talking about adoption of AI in 2025, as around tools, but as well as enterprise adoption. Cursor grew, other high adopter tools continuing to build in popularity generally. Yeah, we saw that. Enterprise adoption more being on AI growth and AI enterprises continuing to invest. Absolutely, we see that, and actually at a number of conferences this year, I'm amazed at how many enterprises are really betting on AI. And it's not like normal technologies. You see the startups and the smaller companies betting big, and then of course the enterprises are slow to come in. We're not seeing that. The adoption is
it was
strong.
A sort of hiccup, where there was that study that came out, so it said that most projects of AI fail in enterprises, and there was like a moment of concern that, would everybody kind of pull back, right? And there's definitely still the financial market concerns about the AI bubble. But all in all, I'd say, I guess at the time we sort of made like two somewhat obvious predictions on it. So,
Yeah,
just
but
some freebies.
the gem is the more crowdsourced benchmarks by mid 2025, and that was very close to what actually happened, of course, with
Yeah.
Bench still being obviously very, very much used, but Bench coming around, and a number of other evaluations. I know Spring had their own evaluation for benchmark for Spring applications, and of course Basel came out with their own benchmarks as well for Next.js applications. This is something which people are realizing there is a need for, and it is being crowdsourced. So
Yeah.
that was a very strong.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully, one a little bit less obvious, but it comes back to almost, we have to have a measuring stick. We have to be able to deal with them, and as we do more and more, we need more and more benchmarks. So there's probably, like this year, we sort of mentioned a handful over here, but I think the idea of releasing a benchmark became like a very fashionable thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like so many benchmarks around, and I think that's great. So much so that there's need for tooling like Tbench, right? Like tooling to create benchmarks. I mean, we're big fans of Tbench, Harbor that we use on top of that, as they're sort of the newer version of it. So, evals are kind of growing. And I think I saw one post from someone talking about how developers will become data scientists, which I don't love that analogy, but I think there's a grain of truth in there, which is, you have to embrace this, in this world, your work. You're producing software through instructions to the agent, and in that world, you don't have determinism. You cannot say, this works and this doesn't work. And what you need is statistics, and evals give you that means. And so I'll sort of say that will continue, and the competency of running an eval, defining an eval, executing an eval will be one that will grow both in individual developers and in development organizations. They will need to have their own benchmarks for what whether an agent is worthy, capable of performing actions in their environment, in their development.
And of course, one of the reasons why we're building evals as a first-class citizen into the context management platform that we're building.
I think eventually every developer organization needs to have benchmarks to say, can this agent work in my environment?
Yep. And of course, when there are changes or when you want to compare whether it's agents or context, you have the ability and the means to do so.
Indeed.
So let's look forward to 2026, given how
we'll continue our sort of fool's errand over here. I think we weren't like overly audacious in sort of our in our predictions in 2025.
I think so. Shall we see if there are any audacious?
Well, we'll see. We're pretty reasonable people.
So I think from my point of view, I'm going to stay away from the day one development. That's a manana problem, I think. So let's talk about agent usage, how people are using agents. In 2025, of course, everyone's jumping on the agent train. And it's a case of, can we pull this into our organizations? Can we get adoption? And people are very, very much trying to work out, what can we do with agents? How can we pull agents in? I think in 2026, we're going to go to that next level, which is, okay, we want to be using agents. We're trying to adopt agents. We're trying to bring it in. That's a given. How do we actually make sure we are effective at using agents? How do we actually tune the way we're using agents? And I think a lot of this is going to be, the means to which you can provide an agent, things like context, but it's also the way in which we learn to use agents. And there are ways in which we can improve that. Maybe it's through the means in which we parallelize agents. Maybe we break down tasks and have different agents running those. So I think there's going to be a mechanism in which we need to learn how to more effectively use agents, but there's also, like we say, with the agent enablement and the drive to use context better to get the most out of agents. All of that together will hopefully establish a way that we can kind of like measure how effective, how productive we are with agents, and get that kind of start to be talking with real data, real numbers about the ROI of us using agents, not just individually, but as an organization as well.
Yeah, the pragmatism.
I feel like, I don't know if we'll get there or not in 2026, but I think our mindset will shift to asking those questions and really, performing tests that will try and give us that data.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible prediction. Do you think organizations that are large enough will focus on like getting a portion of the team to be, like 5 stars, in how they use agents more?
Yeah.
Or would they focus more on broadening and having like everybody in the team use agents?
It's a really good question. I think there's always this myth when we think about things like maturity. That when we look at a large organization, we think, what's the maturity of this large organization? And it doesn't work like that, because every team is at a different maturity. Every team is at a different level of adoption. And I think what we would need to do is recognize at what level each of these teams are at. Some will still be in that 2025 model of, look, we just need to get people using it. We need to get it into people's hands. Others will be much further ahead, where they'll be actually, yes, these are teams that we can actually really understand what they're doing, how much it's affecting them, and then take those lessons to spread across those various groups.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be a mix, to be honest.
Yeah, on those. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think that's very like cloud adoption style or DevOps adoption style, which is you have to have some forerunners. And I think once you demonstrate something is sort of successful, then you start getting excited about rolling it out to the team.
Yeah, and I think it's equally what we saw at Sneak when we think about developer adoption of security or secure development. It's something that individuals have that passion for, or individual teams will do more successfully, and those learnings they can be shared across to other teams through the value, I guess. But my other is, I guess, when we think about what last year we were talking about model winners, this year we're actually talking about agents, and will there be a clear standout agent winner? I think Claude Code today has been one of the most successful, possibly one of the leading agentic coding tools for a developer to use. I think we'll see other agents get closer, and you'll probably start seeing that more that kind of like, one model, one agent jumping another, and hopefully I think we'll see, because it's important for competition, that we will see that kind of swapping and changing of this new vendor or existing vendor has just added these new features, and they're actually more performant than these others. I'd like to think there are going to be some new vendors that we haven't seen today, but we'll see.
Yeah, I had a similar one kind of in my queue, which was, I think there's going to be a bit of a separation between the agent and the model.
Yeah.
And so, kind of like when you're using, an IDE, but you use the same IDE for developing in different languages, do you, what would be the dominant version, of it? Would you use, Claude Code? So today, many of the agents support many models. You can use Claude with a non-anthropic model. But it sort of feels like, my kind of intuition would be like, Claude would be best with the Claude models, right? Like, with the sort of the anthropic models. And I think that's true for all the assumptions. Would there be independent agents that work well? And so it's interesting. I mean, I would predict that in 2026, there will be kind of a increased adoption, or sort of like the rise of agents that are separate from model companies from it, or maybe an open sourcing that sort of gets contributed. I guess Goose is one example of that. So I guess I would still predict that the majority of users will use things that just sort of come bundled in with model and agent, all in one, but that we will have some sort of sweetheart sort of agents that get adoption that are separate. So we'll see how it goes.
No, I think that's absolutely right, and I think we'll today we look at an agent and we just think it's the agent is my AI tool, very similar to an LLM, and a lot of people that I've spoken with sometimes it's a little bit blurry, the lines between an agent and an LLM.
We should note that there are a bunch of tools today that are kind of agent orchestrators, right? And they work at higher levels. So you have companies like like Warp or like Warp Dev in the terminal, or there are a bunch of sort of agents today that are not from the model companies. So we'll see how they fare.
Yeah,
I guess I would add to that. I think your sort of comment on kind of becoming effective resonates with me. I'd be more specific, and I'd say there will be a whole kind of wave of best practices and tools and such to go from single player to multiplayer. Because I think today still, so much development happens like in the AI. The AI native developers, they're solos. They're sort of solo developers, maybe at most two. They work with a lot of alignment, and I think in parts that's the sort of the magic, right? If you think of them as managers now, right? Because they have teams that they operate, and so they can manage multiples. But we still need to think about organizational alignment, or there still needs to be, dependencies between one system and another. And so I think this notion of single player to multiplayer, thinking about dependencies, thinking about commitments, how do we interact with those, and how do we still maintain the kind of the AI native future? I think we're going to see a lot of evolution over there, and some of that will come to the models. I think the models might introduce things like committed behavior, sort of maybe introduce more harder tests that are built in, which again you can technically do today, but oftentimes the agents would just modify the tests, to and so practices around it. So I think we're going to see big improvement over there. Talked about sort of the agent separation from the model. Clearly, I think agent enablement capabilities will sort of come along with that as well. And I guess the one that I would sort of say that's a bit more on the limb is I think we'll see much more adoption of open models. I feel like what has happened during this year, towards the end of the year, is there are state-of-the-art models, but the pace of change is reducing. It is shrinking, and I think there have been more and more really good open models. And as enterprises and organizations as a whole start kind of being more successful with agents, they will start spending a lot of money. And the immediate spend might be very worthwhile because it comes at the expense of human labor, which is even more expensive, but it's still big numbers. And so I think people will start getting to really care about, well, like, do I need Opus, for this, right? Or even Sonnet, or can I just use this much cheaper open model to run? I think NVIDIA's acquisition of Grok is like slightly in that domain as well. Is like to see that trend happening. And so I would predict that in 2026 we'll see much more substantial use of open models, especially in development and in sort of recurring activities. Like when you're in your desktop with a model, you want kind of maximum power because you want to work them. But when they are repeated tasks that you can evaluate, you can sort of get a sense for how good would an open model be at that. And that comes back a little bit to that sort of sense that like benchmarks will continue and people will have their evaluations.
And also the focus on effectiveness and the ROI of what we're doing and what we're using.
I think we will sort of see a whole like one sort of stream that's probably going to stay the minority of people that are fully open, right? They're using an open agent with an open model, and they're running it on sort of hosted servers maybe, but like on sort of their control servers, and they run with those, because I think at this point a lot of the accomplishment, a lot of the means of success is the methodology of how do you use the agent, how do you kind of give it the right context at the right time, how do you make all those interactions. And I think a lot of that know-how will the intelligence that are in the open models will be enough to do a lot of that work.
Yeah. Very interesting, and we'll chat about this in 2027, which sounds weird to say, but so we have to get used to
barely that. 2026, aren't it? Hold on there, Simon.
Sorry.
One year at a time. 1 year at a time.
We'll see how accurate we are with those predictions in a year's time.
Cool.
We'll still be here with hopefully some amazing speakers and content every week. At the end.
We have a few we already know of.
We have. You've already started with a couple.
Yeah, we're there. The beauty of recorded podcast, Adam. We actually have a couple of episodes coming your way. One with the previous CEO of GitHub, Thomas Domke, and he, we had a great conversation talking about a variety of like building AI dev tools on it and perspectives on it, and why in the world would he go off and sort of build another AI dev startup on it. So that was a fun conversation. And then Mirko, who is the CEO and founder of -0, which is a really interesting company in the observability space, talking a lot about sort of agents in that world. What is AI native for observability, and how do we sort of bring in that kind of a power of intelligence, as well as like what context is needed to the world of operations, which is often kind of seeks determinism. I don't know if seeks determinism because they sort of use the system misbehaving, but it's a bit more sort of risk aware, shall we say. So super interesting conversations, and just the harbingers of a super interesting year with, I know it's probably going to be a fairly tame year, sort of a quiet year.
Yeah, I expect so. Yeah. Quiet, slow moving.
I think it's going to make 2025 feel quiet.
Yeah.
So
amazing. Well, all the best for 2026 to everyone. A happy new year.
And thank you for listening and following this. And again, keep the feedback flowing.
Absolutely. Thanks all for listening, and tune into the next episode.